What's the best tuner car for under $5,000? Well, you could look at the obvious picks like Honda Civics, Nissan 350Zs, older Mustangs, or a clapped out BMW. However, if you're looking for something a bit more atypical and less played out, let me introduce to you specifically the third generation of the Audi A4, the B7. While the B6 improved upon Quattro and introduced new engine options, the B7 A4, introduced in 2005, stands out as a tuner-friendly gem for enthusiasts on a budget. So here we are. The B7 A4 is the last A4 model built on the PL46 platform. Announced in late 2004, with sales starting in mid-2005, this is one of the most uncommon A4s you'll actually still see driving on the road. The most common engine this car was sold with, and the one we're going to be talking about today, was the 2-liter TFSI 4-cylinder. But what makes this a fantastic tuner car? Well, there's a few things that allow it to see great potential for an enthusiast build, including power gains, pricing, reliability, practicality, and curb appeal. Firstly, and most obviously, it has a turbocharger setup. Forced induction cars make more power than naturally aspirated cars as they compress the intake air before it reaches the combustion chamber. Because there's more air present, there can also be more fuel present. Since oxygen and fuel are the two basic components needed to sustain ignition in engines, turbos allow for more of both to be introduced, thus making more power. What this means for a stock B7 is that it creates 209 horsepower and 276 pound-feet of torque using its KO3 turbo. This doesn't seem like a lot in today's standards, but for a cheap, untuned, almost 2-decade-old car, it's not bad. When you factor in that a large percentage of the B7 A4s were sold with a 6-speed manual, it just adds to the fun. Since the 2-liter B7 makes more torque than horsepower even after tuned, a lot of the gains you'll see will be from the increase in torque. Those diesel trucks you see gapping Lamborghinis on the drag strip? Almost all of that speed was from torque. I'm going to throw a few graphs on the screen from the tuning company Unitronic displaying their stages and respective power gains. These tunes are readily available for $500 to $700 and are easily mapped to your car's ECU using a laptop. The modifications that these tunes may require are pretty easy given that you have some mechanical experience, so gains aren't really that difficult to achieve on the B7. Next, we're going to be getting into pricing, which plays arguably the biggest role for me, you, and every other enthusiast that's trying to find a fun project car on a budget. I picked up my B7 for $1,200 in near laughable condition. However, I've completely done it up with wheels, coilovers, bumper and grille upgrades, sound system upgrades, quality of life upgrades, headlights, turn signals, and intake, downpipe, exhaust, and tune, all for right around $5,000. And this car has only 106,000 miles. That may seem like a significant number, but when you factor in that the car is a 2006, that means the car only really averaged about 5,600 miles a year. I regularly see B7 A4s on Facebook Marketplace for a huge price range, anywhere from about $400 for something with issues to $6,000 with something with low miles and mint condition. There's a few things you should consider when you're going to buy your B7. Mainly, do you want an Avant? Do you want a sedan? Do you care if it's baseline? Or do you care if it's S-line? I'll be making a video on how to shop for and lowball for B7 A4s on Facebook Marketplace, so make sure to subscribe if you're interested or just don't want to miss it. Another one of the most important factors to consider when shopping for a project or tuner car is going to be how reliable it will be during its life. The B7 has some issues, as any platform does, but if you regularly keep up with service intervals, they are essentially non-issues. The first of only a few prominent issues with the B7 generation is the cam follower. This is a part underneath the high-pressure fuel pump which decays over time and can eventually shrapnel and send metal into your engine, damaging camshafts. There is an upside to this though. Replacement cam follower kits can be really cheap, costing maybe only about $30 to $40 for the whole thing, including the cam follower itself, high-pressure fuel pump bolts, and a new gasket. Audi recommends to examine and or change this part every 30,000 miles. However, if the car is tuned, it would be safer to examine it every oil change or every 5,000 to 6,000 miles for damage and replace if necessary. The second or equally most common issue with the B7 A4s is snapping timing belts. If the timing belt hasn't been replaced every 100,000 miles or so, they can break, causing the engine to skip timing and potentially totaling the engine. Audi recommends changing the timing belt every 90,000 miles or so to ensure the reliability of your engine. Timing belt service is definitely something that a confident DIYer can do by themselves if given some tools, some time, and a proper video tutorial or guidance from an experienced mechanic. These videos already exist online and are quite helpful. A less critical but still relevant issue is the carbon buildup on the intake valves of the engine. This can slightly decrease the performance, but typically isn't a critical issue until around 130,000 miles. I think if you cleaned the valves or got them cleaned every 100 to 150,000 miles, I don't think you'll really be presented with an issue. Given that these cars are 16 to 17 years old at the newest, one of the most common issues that you'll be presented with is a torn diaphragm on a stock diverter valve. This can cause a significant decrease in boost. This is actually a really easy and relatively cheap fix, and I've actually done my own video on it. I'll link it right up here. It's pretty simple. And while we're on the topic of diverter valves, another thing is that Audi engines typically are not designed to run with blow-off valves. So instead of going for a blow-off valve repair, opt for the newest revision OEM diverter valve, which are typically less than $100. The revision completely replaces the diaphragm with a valve mechanism. If you're in love with the noise of blow-off valves, I recommend getting the cold air intake in tandem with the newest revision diverter valve, as you can actually still hear the I've actually also made a video on B7A4 flybys, cold starts, and revs. I'm going to link that up here if YouTube lets me. If not, it's on my channel and you can go find the video easily. The PCV valve, which stands for positive crankcase ventilation, is an emissions part that's basically recirculating exhaust fumes back into your engine to make less smog. This is actually an issue in a lot of Audi cars, and you'll see it pretty commonly across the board, but it's not too hard of a fix. I think it's about 4 or 5 bolts holding it in, and I believe you can get an OEM or OE part for about $100 to $200, which should be a quick and easy fix. The last common issue with the B7A4 is the broken glove boxes. Since these cars are now getting older, the passenger glove box assembly is frequently broken. It's not a huge deal since the glove box door can still close properly, but it doesn't stop where it's supposed to, and instead will basically fall down and hit you in the feet. Luckily, you won't be left with any broken toes because the part is basically plastic with leather upholstery on it. Practicality can also be a determining factor when looking for your perfect project car, and the B7 is not an underperformer in this category. Every B7 had leather front and rear seats, contributing to the comfort level necessary for daily driving. The B7 also has plenty of storage room, including a trunk that's so large that I, a 6'1" male, can comfortably fit in, and probably also fit another person in there. Just don't be kidnapping people. The B7 actually has plenty of room for carrying around people as well. I've crammed about 5 people into my B7 sedan before, and although the person in the rear middle seat is kind of cramped, it's not like they were in pain because of it. On the exterior of the car, the B7A4 boasts front and rear fog lights, making it perfect for traversing dense fog and shitty weather. The last thing I'm going to mention regarding practicality is the Quattro all-wheel drive system, but I don't think I even need to go into too much detail there. It's a beast in the snow when paired with good tires. Finally, let's take a look at the curb appeal of the B7A4. At a glance, this car doesn't seem like much, especially when not much is done to the interior and is mostly stock. But when you start adding visual mods like aftermarket headlights, rain visors, tint, sequential side markers, wheels, a ducktail spoiler, etc., it becomes something worth looking at. The base model B7A4 has upward-facing fog light bezels on the front bumper, as well as a smaller grille than the S-Line. The S-Line front bumper is nearly identical to the B7 S4 front bumper, with downward-facing fog light bezels and a larger grille size. One thing that actually pissed me off about this, though, was that if you get an S-Line or S4 front bumper, you actually can't get a honeycomb grille for either. The exceptions is finding an OEM RS4 grille, which aren't cheap, spending $700 on one from a website I've never heard of, or spending $400 and a weekend cutting up an aftermarket grille from an A6 to swap the grille mesh onto the B7 border. The bonus of having an S4 front bumper is that you actually can find the fog light bezels with a honeycomb. Those go for about $50 on eBay, and you can find them cheaper sometimes, but they look pretty sharp. The bonus of having a base model B7, though, is that you can swap the headlights, interior bulbs, and any other light bulbs with aftermarket ones without setting off the CAN bus warnings, which will consistently alert you on the odometer screen on your gauge cluster. Another thing is that there really aren't any great looking taillights for the sedan model. There are some cool spider taillights you can pick up if you have the Avant, which is basically a wagon, and those look pretty good. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Hopefully it's helped you get a step closer to figuring out what project car you want, or at the bare minimum provided you with some entertainment. Please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you would like to see more B7A4 content. Cheers!